Hi everybody, we're truly blessed because we're sitting here with the rather wonderful David Reitzas, and we're at Westlake where they recorded Thriller. So
yes, a lot of history with Westlake.
Thanks for having us. I really appreciate this.
Welcome. Can't wait to get into it.
Where were you born?
I was born in Massachusetts. It's in Fall River. It's about half an hour east of Providence, an hour south of Boston.
Lovely.
Grew up there. My family was in the sweater business. My great-grandfather started a mill in the early 1900s.
Incredible.
And so the family business was making sweaters and they still do.
Would we know the name of the sweater business?
Well, it was Fall River Knitting Mills, and now it's Northeast Knitting Mills.
So how do you go from being born into a sweater dynasty and getting to become a world-renowned recording engineer?
I was kind of always rebellious, loved music, would go see every concert, started playing the drums, wanted to be a rock and roll star. So, and my mom and dad, they supported it. And I have a younger brother who kind of took over the place of moving into the business, and he's done quite well. But I just loved music, so they supported me and followed that path.
Now, being in the Boston area, does that mean Berkeley became an option?
Yeah. When I was 16, I went to a 6-week course at Berkeley for drums, percussion, ear training, harmony. Drove an hour up each day, went to class, an hour back, and loved it.
So you didn't turn that into doing a degree there?
No. Well, when I was only 16, but it was great. It was great. That was where I kind of got a taste of learning about music. I had taken trumpet lessons, guitar lessons, piano lessons, but going to Berkeley, given the concept of harmony and ear training and intervals, it was like, oh, okay, I kind of like this. But I'm a drummer, so it was like, all right, that's what I want to do. I want to be a rock and roll drummer. I want to be like John Bonham. I want to go play around the world in front of audiences. Kind of where the whole shift from being a musician drummer turned into engineering is I was going to University of Rhode Island, playing in bands, and we went to the first session with this band at Normandy Sound, Rhode Island. They said, Dave, we want you to play on these songs. And I said, great, 2 songs? Okay, perfect. They said, we're going to go in Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I was like, for what? It's only 2 songs. I had no idea that you go in and you had to do what we're doing. So that was a fun thing, getting drum sounds for hours, which you don't even think about these days. And in the middle of one take, standing in this part of the control room, and the producer and the engineer are talking like this, and the producer says, I think we need to put a little 10K on the snare. And I kind of panicked because I had never heard of what a 10K was, or where I could buy it, or where to put it on the snare. So I remember that moment so well that I just kind of panicked, like, oh, I better learn how to do this stuff so that I can get my drums to sound like John Bonham. And that was when I decided not to go to college. My mom was looking at the back of Rolling Stone, and she found an ad for the Institute of Audio Video Engineering. And she said, Dave, how's this sound? It's in Hollywood. I said, all right.
Wow, that's a big change.
And so my mom and dad said, yeah, that sounds good. I said, all right. I was going to go come out here, learn how to engineer, and then go back east. But as soon as I came out here, last day in 1984, it was like, ooh, okay, engineering, I think I like this.
So per the notes here, you were neighbors with Jeff Buckley.
He was just Jeff at the time to me. Nobody had ever heard of him. He was going to Guitar Institute, and he was in the next apartment over. So we used to hang out all the time, and I had a Simmons SDS kit in my apartment. He'd come over and play it, and then when I'd go over to his place, and he would air drum to all the Led Zeppelin. We'd listen to all the Zeppelin albums, and he would be air drumming, and we just had a blast. I brought him over to the studio, the school studio. I remember he did a bunch of crazy voices for my answering machine that I wish I probably have it in a box or a bag somewhere. That it was great. Years later, I moved on, he moved on, and I was walking by a record store, and I saw a picture of Jeff in the window of the Grace album. I was like, Jeff? And, the rest is history. I ran into him a few times after that. We had a great little hangout.
But that's like 9 years between you knowing him and that record coming out.
Yeah.
It's quite a long journey.
I met him in 85, yeah.
Oh, 85, so like 8 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
I had a friend, this was right after school, and everyone's out looking for their jobs. So I had my school resume, and someone said, you should go over to Cherokee. I think Toby Wright and another Toby, they were over there. So I kind of had a little in to get in. And there was this guy, Milton Chan. He was the chief runner. And I bugged him. He didn't want to give me a job. I kept going back and saying, no, can't do it. And I kept bugging him, and he finally said, all right, I don't want you bugging me anymore, so you got the job. And I give him a lot of credit because I learned a lot about being a runner in those days. Cleaning the toilets, making the coffee. He'd come in the studio in the morning and he'd like feel around and say, all right, well, you've been sleeping, and he'd feel the pencil points, and just everything had to be just set up perfect for the clients. And we had lists, 10 pages long of everything that needed to be checked. It was a pain in the ass being a young guy that wanted to do stuff, but I give him a lot of credit for instilling a sense of organization and pride, and that everything should be meticulous and ready for the clients.
Absolutely. I mean, studio time was not cheap in those days, so it better be.
Yeah.
What was the journey from runner to assisting on your first sessions?
I was a runner at Cherokee for probably about 6 months. And I told him when I first got the job there that I have this annual fishing trip that I go on, and it's not for another 6 months. And he goes, no problem. And then we got a few days out before that. I was getting ready to leave, and he says, oh, we're too busy. You can't go. I said, I'm sorry, Milton, but I got to go. And he said, you might not have a job when you come back. And I went on the fishing trip because my family was important to me, and we'd been doing this for years. And I didn't have the job when I came back. So it was a decision that I had to make. So I chose family. And then my next place I went looking was Sound City. So I'm a messenger, and I went over to Sound City and I met Paula Salvatore, Paula.
I know Paula very well, yes.
Yeah, Paula, great. So we hit it off. I was a runner still over there, and then they upgraded me to rehearsal studio manager. So just being at Sound City during those times, there were a lot of great projects that came through. I think that's where I first met Don Smith, because he did a lot of work there. So Sound City, good history, great sound. I remember sitting in those, like cleaning the control room and cranking up the big speakers at night, playing cassettes. I'm working at Sound City, and I'm a messenger at the same time. So on an off day, I'm a messenger gig, and I'm close by Sound City, so I figure I'll go hang out at Sound City while I wait for my next call to pick up a package somewhere. So I'm waiting at Sound City, and the phone rings, and the person that's supposed to answer the phone wasn't there, but that was my job anyway. So I said, I'll help out. So I answered the phone, and I think it was Ross Hogarth. It might have been Ross, but he was at Rumbo, and they were looking for an assistant to come help on a project. So I looked around for who they wanted, and they weren't there. So I don't know what made me do it, but I said, he's not here right now, but I'll do it. And they said, great. Okay, when can you get here? So I was like, okay, I had to go up to Paula and say, Paula, they're looking for someone at Rumbo, and this would be a good opportunity. So she said, they want you, go for it. Ron Farah, I did a couple of days with him. He was producing a band called Year Zero. And then Phil Caffel was there. And then my next session was with Don Smith. And we did 30 days, 12-hour days mixing for a band called The Call. Being an assistant with Don Smith in a beautiful room, Neve console, gear all spread out. It was the gear from the studio and Don's gear. Patch bays were all filled up with patch cards. You couldn't even see any holes left. And it was just, he was a great, great, great guy. Then we also ended up doing Tom Petty, Full Moon Fever.
Incredible.
Free Fallin'. I remember working on that song. The marching part in the middle, that's the Don Smith trick it might not be his trick, but I learned from him, where you get a couple of boxes of 2-inch tape, put on the ground, and then you put an upside down snare drum and then an oritone underneath it. And then you mic up the snares from the top, and you feed the tape snare drum into the Orotone, and it gives you that nice buzzy snare sound. And I've used that a lot since then. So that was the Don Smith stuff. But then Mike Klink came in with a band called Guns N' Roses. Got to work on that record. That was a blast because nobody knew.
That was the first one, Appetite for Destruction.
Yeah, Appetite for Destruction. Nobody had, the record companies knew that they were a good LA band, but nobody had any idea of how big it was going to eventually be. But it was great hanging out with Axl. And I remember we were working on Paradise City, and we were at Rumbo. So it was the Captain and Tennille. You know who that is?
I do, yeah. Everything was white in there, from what I remember.
It had
a lot of white
vibe, yeah. But Tennille was the singer, that was the wife, and Captain was the keyboard player. And he had tons of synths. So Axl said, let's go up in the attic. So we went up in the attic and we're searching around all the synths. And we grabbed this old ARP synthesizer and came down and plugged it in. And within a few minutes, he's playing the intro synth part on Paradise City. And it was like, oh, okay. That was, you get to hear that back later and remember, yeah, I was right there. That was a moment. I was there. It was cool. So we did a lot of, Mike Klink started mixing the record. We did some overdubs, and Mike was mixing, and they ended up sending it out to New York to mix. But just the time I spent on that record was very memorable.
How long was the project?
We were probably in there at least a month or so. Like, they had started before, and then I jumped in and did a bunch of just overdubs and going through each song. The Tom Zutat from the record company would come in, we'd play things for him, and started mixing. And I remember Tom just kept putting in rough mix cassettes and saying, Mike, it needs to sound a little bit more raw like this. And that introduced me to the beat the rough kind of attitude of, we didn't have it like we have now, where you just open up and start where you left off. It was like every day, every time you bring up a new song, it changes. Things are on different tracks. So yeah, it was great. I even got to do hand claps on "It's So Easy" with Axl and Wes Arkeen, who was one of the songwriters. So I remember standing out there, and it's Axl and Wes. And yeah.
Did you get credited?
No, I'm an uncredited hand clapper at Appetite for Destruction.
That'd have been a nice credit.
Yeah. Izzy would just come in and he would kind of hang out and then sit in front of the TV in the lounge watching old Rolling Stone videos. They were very poor at the time, so they didn't even have silverware. So there'd be silverware missing at the end of the day because they needed it to take home to their place in Hollywood. Slash wasn't around that much. He came in a few times, and Duff. And it was more interesting when it started to become a big record. Like, oh yeah, those are the guys that I was just working with 6 months or a year ago, or however long it took. But at the time, it was just a rock and roll band. LA Guns came in there too, a handful of other rock bands. So it wasn't as exciting as you would think about it is now. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, absolutely, yeah. It was work. Your notes say Oasis Studio Assistant Engineer.
Yeah.
Is that Oasis as in Oasis Mastering?
It's Oasis as in Larrabee North now.
Okay.
It was owned by Giorgio Moroder.
Okay.
And I was at Rumbo, and I get a call. This might have been the call from Ross, who was over at Oasis, and they needed an assistant help over at Oasis. So Rumbo said, Dave, you're doing great here, but we want to help out Oasis, so why don't you go over there and help them out a bit? So I went over to Oasis and worked with Brian Reeves on Beverly Hills Cop 2. That was great. Brian Wilson, Smile. Yeah, and then so I worked over at Oasis for a few months. That was when I got a call from Mike Klink, who I had just done Guns N' Roses with earlier. And he said, Dave, I'm out here in Malibu at David Foster's studio doing a project for his sister. And David's looking for a young, hungry engineer to come work for him. And I thought you would be good. So I said, sure. David Foster. Like, I'd heard a bit about him, but when I started looking into who David Foster was, it was like, oh yeah, okay, I want to try this. So I went out, I met David, And in about 15 minutes, he gave me the key to the studio. He said, "You got the job. I got to go away for the weekend. I promised the studio to this woman, this jazz singer. She wants to do some demos, so good luck." It's like, so that was a great moment of secret.
Who was the jazz singer?
I don't remember her name, but she was actually really good. And so it was drum programming, and setting up MIDI and synths and stuff, and which thankfully I knew a lot of people because I had to make a lot of phone calls to prepare. It took me like couple of days to kind of
pulling a lot of favors.
Pulling a lot of favors, saying, "How do you do this? How do you do this? How do you do this?" They had no internet. It was, I had manuals that I could look at, but it was a sink or swim thing, and ended up working out okay. I got things down to tape, and she was happy, so he was happy. And then that was the start of me working with David Foster. His studio in Malibu is beautiful, an SSL E series with some of the same gear that you see here, AMSs, 1176s, LA2s, PCM42s, everything. We were 24-track analog. And David Foster had just come off the Chicago records because he's such a great piano player. Do the piano MIDI'd with the DX7, and then he would add the synth bass and the strings and the French horn and the pads and the bells, and program the drums on a Linn drum machine, be a one-man band. And then we would replace a lot of those sounds with the best session musicians in LA. Got a good taste of working with the top guys. And then we did a record with Neil Diamond. That was great. Neil would come in with his own music stand. He had his like horns and tchotchkes and everything. And he liked the weed at the time. Some movie soundtracks that David was the composer for. Celine, her first English record, she barely spoke any English, and David, we were all blown away by her. But David, he'd occasionally hit the talk back, and he'd go, "Oh, bitchin'," and that was like slang at the time to say how great it was. Mm-hmm. And then we found out later that she was so intimidated because she kept thinking that he was calling her a bitch.
Oh,
but that cleared up pretty fast, and she was amazing. Her, Renee, and all the great musicians on that.
You had your first Grammy with "Unforgettable" of Natalie Cole. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah, it was a project that David was one of the producers. Tommy LaPuma. I had met Al Schmidt many times throughout different projects with David, but this album came along. The very first thing that we did is we went to the vault to get the 3-track master of Nat King Cole doing Unforgettable. And I remember when we went to the place to get it transferred and just pushing that vocal up and hearing Nat in the room with the orchestra and hearing the richness and the deepness. It was like, it just jumped out of the speakers. It was amazing. And then David and I used the tricks that I was telling you about to like take his vocal, move it around, create a click track, build a demo around it, and then we were ready to record that and a bunch of other songs. But that's when I got to spend a lot of time with Al Schmidt.
So you only used the isolated vocal?
Yeah.
You retracked everything else?
Retracked everything else.
How was the bleed? Because they were singing in the same room.
There was a lot of bleed, which when he was singing by himself, Johnny Mandel, who did the arrangements, he would have to kind of write to keep the old arrangement to match up with the leakage. But then when he was muted and Natalie was singing, he could redo the arrangement because he didn't have that leakage. But I remember during mixing, having to use filters and EQs and little punches here and there to try and clean it up so it didn't leak. And something that would be a one push thing today. It took a lot of work, but that was an incredible album. That was just spending time with Al Schmidt on the mixing and recording with David and Natalie. Again, another album where you didn't know how big it was going to be, but that it ended up being the album of the year. And yeah, that was, I remember that, Al and I are in New York with Armin Steiner, and they said, best engineered album of the year. And they said, my whole body just became pins and needles. And that was what a thrill that moment was. So after that Unforgettable record, things started to kind of kick off. And it was also right around that time that David was going through a divorce. He had to quickly move out of the studio. So we moved from this beautiful studio in Malibu with a beautiful console and marble floors and microphones and everything into his next wife's guest house garage. And in 2 days, we had sheetrock and industrial carpet put up, and we just started working. Everything I wanted to patch, I had to just go behind the machine and patch. We didn't have a patch bay, right? When we would have artists come over, there was a room connected to the garage that had a swinging door, and Talkback was hooking up a mic cable to the door and pulling it and go, okay, let's do that one more time. And then you'd let the mic cable go and the door would close. So we went from luxury to
necessity.
And I had just won a Grammy, so I was a little bit cocky at the moment. I was probably more full of myself than I needed to be. And there was one day, it was gardening day, so there's a gardener out there with his weed blower and walking by. It was the middle of summer, so it was hot. We had no air conditioning. There were flies coming in and out of the windows. And I had an attitude. I was like, how are we supposed to hit records under, in this situation? And David was starting to get fed up with me, and everything just kind of like, that sound effect where the brakes just go on, everything stops. Yeah. And David kind of looked me in the eyes and he goes, if you can't work in any situation with what you got available, I don't want to work with you anymore. And it was like, okay, I won't. That was a moment where I said, oh, he's right. It's like, my complaining isn't making the situation better. Mm-hmm. I should be focusing on what do we got? What do we need to get done? What can I do with what we have in the time that we have to do it? And that was just a big moment that humbled me in a big way. And that moment taught me that you really have to make the best of the tools that you have with the time that you have, with no excuses.
Whitney Houston. I mean, I Will Always Love You, The Bodyguard, Preacher's Wife, those are some of the biggest songs of the biggest songs.
That was another big project that just happened. All of a sudden we're working on the soundtrack for The Bodyguard, which again, nobody at the time knew how big it was going to be, but it was Whitney Houston. So, it was like, it's Whitney Houston.
Yeah.
When she came in to sing the songs, she prepared and knew exactly what to do. She knew what she wanted to do. And she would come in, sing however many takes, and say, you got it? And Dave would go, I got it. And then she'd be gone. Like, she didn't have to stick around, and she just gave her best. I could play you later, I could solo up 3 or 4 different takes of I Have Nothing, and you'll hear how well she is prepared. So the good story about The Bodyguard is we went down to Miami to record I Will Always Love You. Me and Bill Schnee and the guy that owns the recording truck. We're recording it at the Fontainebleau Hotel while they're filming the movie. So she's on stage at the ballroom. We have the band off to the side with the curtain pulled around the band as kind of the baffle between her. And she did it. I think it was take 5. That was the complete thing. And out in the truck, it was pouring rain, and it wasn't a completely isolated truck, so that you couldn't really hear well of how great it was, but it was great. So, long story short, I went back to LA, was working on projects. David was in New York doing something, and then he flew back to meet me for a mix of something else. And as he was leaving, he said, Dave, do a rough mix of I Will Always Love You, because Clive wants to hear where it's at. So an hour and a half, I just did a push up the faders, get it sounding good, do it all by heart, because I knew it's just a quick rough mix for Clive. After a months of doing overdubs and working on the song and having it mastered, Clive gets the mastered version. He goes to David, what's this version of I Will Always Love You? I hate it. And David goes, that's the new version. Clive goes, no, I want to use the one that you sent me a few months ago. And David goes, no, that's a rough mix. You can't, we've done things to that. It's much better now. Clive goes, no. So there was a hard fought battle between Clive and David as to which version of I Will Always Love You would be ending up on the record, and Clive won. And
luckily,
yeah, it was great for me. But at the time, I was a little bit embarrassed by it, because if you listen on headphones, you can hear the buzz that was going on in the ballroom, in the intro, in the a cappella intro. And there's a few things, the saxophone's out of tune, and I thought the vocal was loud, and I hope I don't get too much criticism of the rawness of this rough mix. And I was wrong. It turned out being the big hit that it was.
Did you record the vocal?
Yeah, we did that from...
What's your memories of recording the vocal?
I can play it for you.
So where is she?
She's at right center stage, and the band's off to the side.
Wow. But this is being filmed at the same time,
yeah.
Yes? And this is the take that is in the movie?
Yeah, probably 98% of it.
So all this bleed is...
That's the live band, yeah.
The way she climbs to that note now would be corrected, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah. That first part.
A lot of this vocal.
Yeah,
would
somebody
probably
would auto-tune this part here.
Yeah.
Oh, love that moment there. Which take was this?
This is probably take 5. There might have been a couple things that we did get in with other takes, but for the most part, it's one take.
I love that moment with the band here.
Yeah. After the success of The Bodyguard, things started to kick in a little bit more so for me and David, but I started getting requests to work with other people, including I ended up doing more records with Whitney, the Preacher's Wife, and Waiting to Exhale. So I did a lot of work with Whitney. And then David and I got asked to do a couple of songs with Madonna. David and Madonna are almost kind of like oil and water. I remember sitting or working on this song called You'll See. David had done all the programming. Madonna comes in to do the vocals. David would be like, that one wasn't so good. We need to try that one more time. And she'd go, no, I love that. So we'd end up keeping that. And then there would be another one where David would go, oh, that was so good. And she'd go, oh, I hate that one. So they were always kind of like not on the same page at the beginning, but it ended up, we got a great song out of it. And
which song was that?
That was called You'll See. I ended up over at Brooklyn Studios, where that was Freddie DeMann's place. Did a rough mix at the end of the whole recording. Did a nice quick rough mix, and we moved on to another song that we were doing. At the end of that project, Bob Claremountain was mixing that song You'll See, and it's a Sunday afternoon. And I get a call from Madonna. She goes, Dave, I have Bob Claremountain here with me. Can you just tell him what you did on that rough mix? And I was about to like fall over, because Bob Claremountain is like a hero of mine. He's like,
of both of us, yeah. Many of us.
So she's telling me to tell Bob what I did on my rough mix, because apparently she wasn't really liking the way the mix was sounding. So I told Bob, sorry, like this is what I did. Here are a few effects I did, and he goes, okay, great. And then half an hour later, she calls me and she goes, Dave, what are you doing? Can you come down here? And I said, okay. So I went down to the studio and listened to the mix, and it sounded great. It was Bob Claremont. It different than what I did, but it sounded like a real professional, awesome Bob Claremont song. Theory was that we were going to take my first minute and a half and use my rough mix, and then we'll go into Bob's. So I went over to the studio in Sonic Solutions. I took his mix and my mix, and his mix was like 12 dB hotter than my mix. I thought my mix was like loud. I'd gone almost up to the reds on the DAT, and his mix was like punchy. So we evened it out, made that version, and in the end, they just ended up using my version for the record. And then she asked if I would go to London and do Evita with her. And that was the first time where, I had worked with all the people that I'd worked with, David, and artists like Barbara and Madonna and Celine and everybody. This was the first time that I had to go out on and do something with one of those artists without David. And he said, if Madonna's asking you to go to London, you're going to London. Like he wasn't trying to like keep me to work with him. So he said, go. This was the first time that a singer had asked me if they could hold a U-47 tube and roll around and perform with the mic.
Oh, wow. I've never seen that.
And it worked, but yeah, that was great. That was, again, being in the studio with all these great artists, it was a good opportunity for me to get creative and try things. And David had kind of inspired me to do whatever it takes to get it done.
In retrospect, when she did Evita, that was a huge moment because she was a pop star. Everything always sounded like it was doubled or sometimes even quadrupled. Right. And here she was like laying herself bare and like she's singing, and it's theater, musical theater. It's not, that's kind of a big deal. So it really shows that she must really have trusted you.
Yeah. And that was around the time, a little bit before the 3348 track digital machine, that? The Sony 3348?
I do, yeah.
It had the built-in sampler with 42 seconds of stereo sampling that you could take it from the tape into the sampler. It knew exactly down to the millisecond of where it was, and you could subtract milliseconds and move things in the sampler and then put it back onto the tape where you wanted. So I could, not only with the comp box and the built-in sampler and the digital in and out that it had, that I was using it with a pitcher on my right hand, that I could manipulate vocals, like do comps of, move. If the breaths didn't line up, I could sample it, move it 10 milliseconds here, then punch in the breath. And so vocalists really liked my ability to change things. Like there was a moment Madonna came in and she says, oh, I love that, but it's just a little out of tune. And then she goes, I'll just go do it one more time. And as she's walking out, I've already got it set up where I'm just taking it and I'm bringing it right into tune. As she's walking back to sing it again, she'll be like, oh, I guess it's good. So it'd be like, I could, fix vocals without over fixing. So she liked that. A lot of people that I worked with like that. After Evita, I moved on, and Barbra Streisand became one of my big clients for a while. That's a long story. But then I ended up doing Ray of Light with Madonna. William Orbit is a genius, this musical, and he was so ahead of his time. He had done a lot of the work in advance in his home bedroom, whatever place he worked, as his little mad scientist with his Atari computers and his synths and manipulation. And I got involved kind of a little ways in and started doing vocals with her. And one of the first songs that we did was Drowned World, Substitute for Love. William had things coming up on the console, but he didn't have it. And he would create listening to it, and record it into his computer, but he didn't have a way of putting it on tape that easily. So Madonna would come in and he'd have a really good idea going. And then later on, she'd come back in the room and would be completely different. And she'd be like, well, can we go back to that? And sometimes we couldn't. So I kind of figured out a good way to get all of Williams' stuff going through the multi-track and then back to monitoring how I was used to, so that good moments could be recorded. We were working on Substitute for Love, another good rough mix thing. We just at the end of doing the vocal and comping the vocal, we'd play that for, like, Rick Rubin came by with the guys from the record company, Guy Osieri, and we'd play them that song as the thing to get them excited. And everybody just like flipped when they would hear that. That ended up being the final mix because it didn't need to be done anymore. But there's something in that song, I think it's at 417. I was working on a comp. I had my headphones on, and there was one part I punched in, and there's a double breath because it was between two takes. It was like, and when I was playing it for Madonna to hear the comp, I said, don't worry about that. I'll fix it after. And she goes, fix what? I said, there's two breaths there. And she goes, no, I like that. I go, you can't have that. There's two breaths. It's like, it sounds like a bad punch. She goes, no. I want that. And I thought she was crazy. And in the final record, when you hear it, I hear it now as like she's enthusiastic, like she's emotional about that delivery of the line, and it works. But at the time, I was like, oh, it's like I don't put out work with like that kind of flaw in there. But she taught me another thing about how, again, like perfect does not mean perfect. Like there's a perfection that doesn't have to be technically right. So,
did you make that record in England too?
That was done in Larrabee in Studio One.
How long did it take to make?
I wasn't on it for the whole project. It was over a summer, let's say. It was over a summer because, like I said, William, some of the songs on that record were just a 2-track of what William had done at home and Madonna's vocal over it. I remember hearing Drowned World for the first time, and I still listen to that record. I get goosebumps when I hear some of these records that I worked on that at the time, yeah, it was a thrill to be working on with top-notch artists on great songs, but to see the memories that they've given people over the years, and to look back at a record that I was in the room as it was happening, and then now they're considered like classic records. So,
Barbra Streisand, how did that come about?
One day, David wanted me to go over to her house to help set up a mic in her living room. And it was me and David Foster and Kenny G and Barbra Streisand. I started doing the vocals with her and David, and she loved the way that I was treating her vocals. You know, David was doing a lot of the work, but I was learning, and then I would keep helping, and she would have all these ideas of what she wanted things to be, timing and emotion and things, and she was used to people telling her, oh no, you can't do that, you can't do that, it's already too late, it's already on tape, or you can't. And I was one of the guys that started telling her, well, sure, yeah, okay, I can do that. And I would just do, and I would do. So what ended up, I started to do all of her vocals, and Al Schmidt would do the recordings, Bill Schnee, Armin Steiner. But then I would go take these orchestras and go out to her house and work out at her house, working on the vocals. For some period of time, I was using the 3348 out there, but when Pro Tools first came out, then I would go do vocals out there with Pro Tools. There was a point that came after many years of working as an engineer and Al Schmidt doing a lot of the mixing, that she said, Dave, why do I need to get Al to mix this? I like the way your records sound. I had to go up to Al, because there was one record where she liked my mixes, and Al was, we got along so great, and I had to tell him, Barbara wants to use me to mix some of these records. I'm not trying to take this gig from you. And he was like, look, man, if Barbara wants you, go for it. You know, it wasn't threatening to him, but I felt bad because Al had done so much for me. So that was just the start of Barbara and I working together. I was one of the first guys to go out to her house and start working with a Pro Tools rig. I used to mix at a studio. I'd bring it up on the console, I'd get everything sounded good, and then we would use EdNet to hook up digitally, and she'd have speakers at her house listening to my mix. And one day I get a call from her. She's like, Dave, you got to turn the reverb. We're on the phone. She goes, turn the reverb down. I turn the reverb down. She keeps saying, more, bring it less. I don't want that much reverb. And it was uncharacteristic for her because she loved reverb. So we reached the end of the night and I was just baffled that she wanted it so dry. So the next day I went out to her house and I
She's listening in a huge empty room.
she had the Sony receiver with the stadium. They used to have the stadium and jazz hall, concert hall. She had that button pushed. So at that moment, I said, okay, I got to figure out a way that I can mix and then go out to her house and play the mixes first. So I would mix stems and then put into Pro Tools and then go out and then we would adjust out there. You'll see a picture of what the setup is like. It was not treated in any way. It was just a living room. Beautiful, a nice cozy, they called it grandma's house.
Was she close to the studio? From the studio you were mixing in?
No, I'd mix over at that time it was probably Enterprise. Enterprise or Westlake, the other building at Westlake. That was the start of us doing records together. So, and then she went back on tour. In 94 she went on tour and I went out to help with the live recordings with Ed Green, another legend of the TV world of mixing. He was another mentor. Named Al Schmidt, David Foster. I started doing all her live concerts when she came back and did the Millennium concert in 2000.
Do you think, you were talking about going right back to the beginning, a musician, a drummer, wanting to be in Led Zeppelin. Do you think having that kind of love of edgy rock, when you're working with these artists that we would normally associated, especially like Celine Dion and Barbra Streisand, and do you think you bringing that little angular edge to it is what they like? Especially in those days, you're kind of the young guy. Everybody else you're talking about is at least 20 years older than you. Do they find that appealing because they want to? They don't want to be
I
seen?
think that's probably my passion. And also at that time, around the Bodyguard time, I was in a 3-piece rock band too, like a progressive rock band. I'd work all day at the record plant, and then my band would come in and we'd demo from like midnight to 4 a.m. So I was playing in a rock and roll band, probably subconsciously that it's in me. But I think where I had the most success, or not even, I don't know if you call it success, but why people wanted to work with me is because I learned a lot from David Foster about taking pride in what you do, and that if your name is going to go on a record, it has to be the best that you can do. You don't have excuses. You don't say, if only we could have done this, it would have been much better. You put it all out there. So I learned how to listen to what people were saying about what they wanted, listen to how people would describe what they want, and then see what made them happy when they got it. I would be the first one to arrive, the last one to leave. I would sit next to the giants in the industry and see what they did and see how they accomplished things. And it was like I developed an attitude of, I'm not making this record because the Dave Reitzas sound. I want to make the record that when Barbara says it's done, she's happy. She's like, I'm happy I hired Dave because he gave me what I was hoping to get for it and more. I used to be focused on the results. Like, you finish a record and then you see, okay, is this going to be a hit? Like, oh, I can't wait to watch what the album does. And sometimes you'd be excited and sometimes you'd be disappointed. And then at some point I realized I'm just going to enjoy the process. I just want to, I want to be grateful that I get to be in a studio. Like, look at this room we're in. We're in Westlake Studio A with a huge, beautiful console, amazing sound. The temperature's right. If we want to have food, it'll come. If we want great assistance, the vibe, the energy, Tareen is here helping us out. the energy of Westlake and all the studios are just great places to be. And when you add to that great artists, great musicians, it's like what better job? So I guess you could say I appreciate what I do, and I just try to be good at what I do, and like give. Something's never good enough. It has to be either you love it or you got to keep going.
Can't help feeling that, coming from the musical background, and here you are working on stuff which is not like edgy rock, but you're bringing the same passion as though it was. And I think that's a big lesson.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Because people sometimes ask me, like, what do you do when it's like, you're working on a hip hop track and you're not a fan of hip hop? I'm like, I make everything my own.
Yeah.
If I'm working on something, I fall in love with it.
Right.
It could be country, it could be pop, could be hip hop, it could be death metal, it could be any genre.
Yeah.
You just.
I have, when I look back at my credits, it's, we're mostly talking about some of the big superstars, but I've worked on tons of projects with different styles of music. Like, maybe not in the rock land, but one of the, another exciting part of my career has been with Luis Miguel, a huge Latin star.
Huge.
And we hit off great, but we did mariachi records together. I never listened to mariachi records, but before we did those records, when he said that he was, we'd done a couple of pop records and he was going to work on the mariachi record. And at first they didn't think that I was the right fit for doing mariachi, because what do I know about mariachi? But he finally talked himself into saying, yeah, let's have Dave try it. So I studied. I went out and I listened to as much mariachi as I could, and I said, okay, I think I get it. And then I just dive in. It's like, I'm not going to make a mariachi record like anybody else, but maybe that's a good thing, because it's not going to sound like anybody else. It's going to sound like me doing the best I can with great musicians, and the way it comes out is going to be its own thing.
Well, I don't want to gloss over, but of course you, back working with David, you did Josh Groban, Michael Bublé, Andre Bocelli, and some more Celine Dion.
Yeah, just the cool things was to work with Josh Groban, 18 years old, unknown.
Didn't know he was that young.
Unknown, and to hear the beginning of the opera sound, I'm glad I was there. Same with Michael Bublé, to get that Sinatra kind of vibe out of a kid.
So you touched briefly earlier on working with Luis Miguel.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I think he liked the work that I did with Barbara. So I think it was 2003, he asked me to mix for him at Chalice Studio. Have you ever been over to Chalice?
Oh, yeah, I remember Chalice.
I can't even describe what it's like working with him, because he's such a superstar and private kind of guy. He comes in, he works, he's gone, and you don't talk to him when he's out of the studio, but he comes in and he works hard, and he'll come in and he'll have like sheets of paper and he'll sit there and listen to the vocal and little notes, and he'll go out in the lounge. We did his last mariachi record we did right in this room here, but he'll take a little red Sharpie and on the lyric sheet and mark things down, and we'll make little subtle things, and we can go over that 50 times until it's just the way he likes it. I don't speak Spanish, but I understand. Like I get an idea of translation, so I know what they're singing about. To work on vocals.
Did you go for that learning curve that I did doing that Latino records where you don't DS?
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain that to the good folks at home?
The TH, if you can get rid of that S sound, and you're gonna.
And they're like, whoa.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I was like reducing all those S's, and they're like, no. It has that needs to be in there.
I think it was my third and fourth Grammy for that record.
I have you down as second Grammy for Ray of Light here.
Yeah.
Third Grammy for, I don't want to pronounce this wrong, especially when I've got a Gonzalez sitting over there.
Mexico en la piel.
Thank you very much. And a Latin Grammy number 4 for the same album. So you won it at the Grammys and the Latin Grammys. Okay, well, we got some Luis Miguel that we can talk about later down here in the notes. But when I did the last Aerosmith record, we had one song that had orchestra. We were in Al's room, and just further down, I think is it A or 1, but the main studio, Phil Ramone was in there. Yeah. And this was only a few weeks before he died. It was like maybe a month or two. It was awe-inspiring. We opened the door And, there's that huge control room. It was packed full of people. There was an orchestra sitting out there ready to go. And Phil Ramone has got like a pencil from behind his ear. He's holding up the chart and he's marking up the chart with the arranger. And I turned to Jack, Jack Douglas, and said, "Look, Jack, a real producer." And he burst into laughter.
Yeah.
I have, my hairs are standing on end thinking about it. I mean, I got to say hello to him and be introduced to him. And it was like one of my favorite moments of my life.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
His book, Making Records, is such an important book for me.
What a history he has. Juilliard violinist to all those great records that he recorded. I got to meet him like in the 90s, but he did the Billy Joel records, the Paul Simon, and just the list of his credits is amazing. But to work, like Phil Ramone was somebody in the industry, and it was a little different than it is now, but he was the producer's producer and the artist's producer, but he knew as much about gear and engineering and was a big supporter of that as much as he knew about the music. Very like professional. I guess that's a good word to use it. Like I did a bunch of songs with him, with David Foster producing and Phil being part of the overall project. And Phil and I were doing, working on comping the Sinatra vocals and doing overdubs for that, which that's incredible in itself. And then Phil hired me to do a record with Barry Manilow. I did the whole orchestra recording. I'll show you a clip of it after. The ability of Phil to put the right people together in the room was his magic. David Foster, Walter Afanasieff, music guys. These guys could make records by themselves. And Phil was more so of hiring the right people, like a Quincy Jones type. You could say Quincy Jones and Phil Ramone in the same sentence and no one's going to fault you. He taught me a lot about listening, again, about being prepared, keeping the lines of communication open. There's nothing worse when you're sitting next to Phil Ramone, and if you have an artist out there that's at mic and they're trying to wave at you because you don't know or you're not paying attention, you don't want to do anything like that. Keeping lines of communication open was something that I learned early on. Also, the Michael Bolton record that we did that was great too. We did that at A&M. But the Barry Manilow record, I started mixing on an Icon. Is it the Icon or D Command or like the big one? Was it the Icon, the Pro Tools Icon? I think.
I remember the Icon being big and the D Command being smaller.
Yeah, it was the Icon. It was the first one. It was over at O. Henry Studios, and Phil wanted to be one of the first people to have a record mixed on the Icon. So I started mixing on it, and it was so hard for me to do it. Not hard technically, but I'm used to mixing on an analog console like this. So I spent a few weeks mixing on the Icon, painfully not getting it the way I wanted it to sound. But after a couple of weeks, I said to Phil, "Can I just go to the room next door at O. Henry?" They had an SSL. And I was able in like 30 minutes to pull up a song and just reach and grab and match something that took me a whole day to do. I was about to ask Phil if he wouldn't mind if I could just mix it on the SSL. And I said, "You know what? I've already gone this far in the Icon. I might as well let him keep his dream, and I'll just suffer the pain of not being able to mix it the way I wanted to do it and go back to the thing I talked about earlier. I'm going to make the best of what I have with the time I have and not complain about it." So it ended up working out okay, and I'm glad I got to have that experience on it. But ergonomically, it was a challenge. I like the idea of when you think of bass, it's right there. When you think of the vocal, it's right there, When mixing on the Icon with multiple pages and things, like things weren't always where you expect them to be. So you had to add that extra process of, okay, I hear a sound that I want to change. Where is it? Found it. Now I can change it. And then that little delay time, I hadn't gotten used to yet.
Do you mix much in the box these days?
I do mix in the box, and I'm happy to mix in the box. I prefer to mix on a console. And I know it's not like a question of being able to mix in the box. I'd like actually having the convenience of being able to do things at home, but I also like coming out of the home too. But what I like to do is I like to bring the artists into the studio and then mix all day and then mix down to stems in Pro Tools and then tweak the stems. I think most of the people that know of me like to come in the studio.
For your stems, how detailed do you get? Do you do like kick, snare, rest of the drums, kick, snare, toms, rest of the drums?
Usually it'll be kick, snare, then maybe a stereo drums. It's usually something that I think if I know something I could probably tweak later, or if I want to have separation, then I'll make a separate stem for it. I'll have like kick, snare, drums, bass, guitar, piano, vocal dry, vocal wet, pads, string, like, and then anything that seems like it could be manipulated or might need to be manipulated or would be a pain to, like, if I thought that if there's a lot of toms in one song, then I'll have a separate tom thing or, but I try to keep it to a manageable thing. But I'm used to, back in the day, even before Pro Tools, 96 channel mix was what I was used to, even bigger sometimes. Now 96 is like a small session,
But you're dealing with orchestra.
Yeah. Being in a studio is just what I love to do. And when I can talk people into coming into the studio and making the investment 9.5 times out of 10, it's worth it. How do you feel? Like
I'm definitely used to working hybrid now, where I do all like little fancy stuff in Pro Tools, because we've got multi-band compressors and dynamic EQs and things that we could only dreamed about. So I can do little detail stuff. But there's something about going into a dynamics channel.
Yeah.
And, especially when you're doing something that's maybe wants to be kind of punchy or loud or something, you boost the high end, put the channel out so it hits the compressor afterwards and it gets like, pah, pah.
Right. Yeah. There's certain things that you just can't duplicate in the box. And not that you need to, but there are certain things that maybe if you never grew up or knowing what it could do, you'll never miss. But if there are certain things that you can do, like I like sometimes, there's a couple of things I like about being in a big studio, on a big console. Like sometimes I'll like for a bass, I'll have a synth bass that doesn't sound so good. Nowadays, I guess I could use a plugin. But back in the day, I used to feed the bass up through the big speakers and mic up the big speakers in here and re-record it, being careful not to get feedback, make sure that everything's assigned right. And then bring it up on a couple channels and you have an awesome bass sound by using the big speakers in the studio. Another thing for bass, like cranking up the mic pre all the way to to the top and then having the fader just a hair up, and some of the distortion you can get out of the console is really, really, really cool at the time. But again, now there's probably 100 or 1,000 plugins that could emulate that kind of thing.
I've never heard anybody, and I've interviewed hundreds of engineers and producers, I've never heard anybody talk about putting it back through like Osberger's, and it's a good idea.
Why not, right?
Yeah.
It's a huge speaker, and you might as well use it for bass, right?
That's really smart, yeah.
Yeah. Being in the studio too is I like to be around people, and when you're in the studio, you're around people, and I could build a studio at home with a control surface and everything, but I don't want to have a studio at home. I want to work in a real studio here. But I like being around people. I like the practical jokes that you can pull on people and just having fun and decorating the room. I remember I was doing a project with Kenny Loggins, and it was around Halloween time. We would hang a skeleton from like the edge of the console down and with the feet touching the faders, and then I'd program the automation faders on the skeleton to have it dance to the beat of the song, and without telling him. So then he'd come in and you'd hit play on the console, and all of a sudden the skeleton would start dancing. Like there used to be like a Neve console where you could pull off the cap of the master fader. So you'd pull the fader all the way down, and you'd pull the cap off, and you'd tape it back up to the top.
Yeah.
And then you'd call in the tech saying, "We're not getting any sound," and you'd see how long it would take them to realize that the master fader was actually pulled down. And that was a bad one. One more good one is that we take the output like of a CD player and bring it up on a couple channels just down low here and put it through a gate keyed by the time code. So every time you hit play to listen to the song, these channels would open up and you'd hear some other music going on. You'd hit stop and the gate would close. So, you'd hit play and then you'd hear your song and you'd solo something up. It would go away. You open it up and it's like, and so, just like practical jokes like that, like, kind of maybe on the cruel side, but fun, just so.
I can't go past any mention of Stevie Wonder.
Oh.
Songs in the Key of Life for me is one of the greatest albums of all time. And ever since hearing that as a little kid, anything Stevie Wonder does, I'm just obsessed with. So how did that happen?
Just being in the room with Stevie Wonder is remarkable because he knows you're in the room. Like he knows what's going on. But I got to work with him on a Ricky Minor project, recorded the orchestra for Shelter in the Rain, did that at O. Henry. And then I got to work with him again. He did the song People with Barbra Streisand. Got to go over to his studio, which I don't know if it's there anymore, but he had a studio on Western. Pretty crazy that you walk into his live room and it looks like a tornado just came through before you because there's instruments and gear and percussion and things all over the place. And you wonder to yourself, how could anybody know what's going on here? But his engineer told me that he's been instructed not to move anything because Stevie knows where everything is in the room. He knows exactly where everything is.
David Foster and Friends.
That was the beginning of a series that David does now where they play the songs of David Foster. So Peter Cetera, Bocelli. He had all these famous Earth, Wind, Fire, Celine. Everybody's singing the songs of David Foster. Again, with the great players. It was JR on drums, Nathan, Dean Parks, Michael Thompson, Randy Waldman, and full orchestra. That was a project that I ended up doing. Remember I told you we went to a garage. After the garage, we went to another nice studio in Malibu. And then in the mid-2000s, he was at a condo before he was going to move into his next place. So we ended up mixing this record. We started mixing it in his condo. I was in a little closet trying to mix this and in the back bedroom. And then I found a place around the corner called On the Path. It was an art gallery. Hired in a SSL 900 console. Beautiful art gallery on 2nd Street in Santa Monica. Started mixing 96 channels of Pro Tools, trying to mix it into a 24-channel console. I spent 3 weeks working on this record, and I couldn't. I was pulling my hair out because I wanted it to be better. And the one guy that told me to make good with what you got, I had to go up to him and say, David, I know that you've taught me how to make the best of what I got, but I really think I could do a much better job on this if I were to come over to Westlake. Can you give me a chance to go see if I can make it better? And it was so hard for me to say that. And he said, you know what? If you think that it's going to make this record better, then go give it a shot. And I came up to Westlake, up to the Santa Monica building. And again, in 1 week, I did more than what I did in 3 weeks of trying to mix it.
Compromise.
Well, yeah, it was compromise. Like if it was I probably could have made it work and it still would have been great. But I thought it could be so much better doing it a different way. And we had the ability to do it. It was just a matter of time and a little bit more money. But David allowed me to go do it, and he was thankful that I did it. That's a beautiful record, and it shows off the talent of David Foster. If anybody doesn't know about David, then this will show you the songs that this guy's written.
Another highlight here, Seal on the Soul record.
Oh, yeah.
How did that come about?
We started this record in David's condo again, doing demos. Jerry Hay was doing the horn and string arrangements. We recorded that at Capitol, Record Plant. I think I did some of the overdubs here at Westlake. But yeah, and by meeting Seal on that record, he asked me to mix one of his live records too. Another great guy. Yeah. I like working with great singers, as you can probably tell.
You have a long history of working with amazing singers. Yeah. So we're moving on to the 2010s. More studio and live concerts with Barbra Streisand, Luis Miguel, Pop and Mariachi, so more of the same. Back to working with Michael Bolton, Andrea Bocelli, Josh Groban again. I see a name that jumps out, Carole King.
Oh yeah. I had worked with her on a few songs with David somewhere in the 90s. Sherry Condor, I don't know how she's related, but she got a hold of me. Carole King was doing a remake of Tapestry live in Hyde Park, and they wanted me to mix it. We did some augmentation help to make it sound close to as good as Tapestry, but she's such a great performer and such a great performer.
And one heck of a songwriter.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Kind of a cool project that I'm working on that's kind of heartfelt to me is I have a good friend, Pam Lillard, who's no longer with us, but I did a bunch of records with her. She's kind of a singer-songwriter, folk blues singer. That we did a bunch of records together. And she's been a friend for 20, 25 years. And around 2017-18, we went into the studio to record. She wanted to do standards because it was something that she loved, those songs. So came in and just did a few passes of a bunch of standard songs like Moon River, Oh What a Beautiful Morning, What a Wonderful World, A Dream is a Wish, a bunch of old standards. And she passed away in 2021. And after she passed away, I was talking with the family, and they thought it would be a great idea if I was able to do something with those standards. So they were just demos, her and piano. So I took those demos and took her vocal off and created clicks of how I thought her best vocal would be. And I found an arranger friend of mine, Jerry Williams, who had done a lot of stuff with Donnie Marie and Daniel Emmett, great arranger. So we spent most of 2022 working on making beautiful arrangements now with synths and changing timings and arrangements and everything, just with using her vocal. And finally in December, we went and we recorded a real orchestra.
Incredible.
On this, and nothing like these original demos. I was just using her vocal. It fixed, I only had 2 or 3 takes of each song.
So a real labor of love.
Big labor of love. So finally, now check this out. It gets a little rough here, but in the middle of December, we recorded the orchestra, and Jerry and I have been working on this throughout the year, and then at the end of last year, he passed away.
Oh.
So here I am, I'm working on a record for my friend who had passed away in honor for her and her family. And I'm working with this guy, Jerry Williams, we were having such a great time going back and forth and making the arrangements better and making it beautiful. And we finally put the orchestra on. And then I was just getting ready to do the rough mixes, and we lost him. So now here I am at the beginning of this year, trying to finish this record with just myself, just like doing it and knowing that the family's going to hear it. But her name's Pam Lillard, and it's a beautiful record, and it'll be coming out soon. And
that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I can't really skip over working with The Weeknd.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I mean,
forgot about him. Yeah,
pretty huge.
Oh yeah. You're right. If you didn't say that, I probably would have forgotten about it.
Well, they're your incredible
I would have
notes.
regretted it later on.
Yeah.
But, Stefan Macchio, amazing songwriter, producer. He did Wrecking Ball. He wrote with Miley Cyrus, and he did Celine. He hired me years ago to help him with the Canadian Hockey League thing. He got a gig doing all the bumpers for that, and we got along great. And he got the gig to do the song "Earned It" for 50 Shades of Grey. And he called me up. He said, "Dave, got this new artist called The Weeknd, and can you mix his song?" I said, "Sure." So they sent me a rough, and I did a little search, and I didn't know about The Weeknd, but I looked it up, and I go, "Oh yeah, I think I heard of this guy before." I'm seeing YouTube views of, at that time, this is 2015, it was in the 10 to 20 million views, and it was like, oh, okay, this guy's big, but people didn't really know who he was at that time. So over Westlake C, we had one day to do it. Did it in one day, sent it to him at night. He loved it. I think the next day I made a little vocal up, half dB, done. And then they asked Stefan to do a couple more songs. We did Real Life and Angel for the Beauty Behind the Madness record. Did that in Studio E over at Westlake. Incredible. You know, that song earned it. To hear that on the radio as many times as it, you know, that kind of song, I was blown away. That was another one of it. It went way further than any of us ever expected.
Couple of things to cover. Another Luis Miguel. Correct me if I'm wrong. It says that you won 3 Grammys for this album.
Yeah, Mexico por siempre.
Yeah,
Mexico
por siempre. Is that right?
Okay. You're asking me?
Yeah.
Actually, this was the first time he wanted me to actually do all the recordings. So I was there on day one. Most of the other records that we did, I was just mixing. But he wanted me to record from day one. And
worked out well.
Yeah, it worked out great.
3 Grammys.
And again, I had never recorded mariachi before, but I did my homework, learned how to do it, and made it up as I went along.
Absolutely. Doing your homework, what did you learn from sort of any research?
The timings, just like just the feel. I listened to music, and I listened to a lot of mariachi, and I wanted to know how it made me feel. And the records that made me feel good, like he uses a group called Mariachi Vargas, who've been around for 100 years. You know, they've replaced players throughout the years.
I was going to say some old players in there.
So I just listened to a lot of mariachi music, and I just remembered the way I felt when I was hearing them. So when it came time to record, I kind of had a vision in my mind of what I think it would sound like in the room that we were in. We were at United in the back room B. The way that I set it up originally was completely wrong from what it ended up being, because I had imagined that they were going to be performing like you'd see them on the street, you know, or, you know, all kind of lined up. And then I realized as soon as the first guy came, I said, no, this is not going to work. So I got the assistant. I said, okay, put the violins over there, separate these guys, and then made kind of a quick change before everyone showed up on the fly, and put the guitar the bass in its own room. And we spent a few weeks recording, and it was probably one of the happiest times I've had in the studio to work with 16 players. I don't speak Spanish. Most of them spoke a little bit of English. And so communicating through music, having fun together, and listening to mariachi music all day is like, it's like it puts you in the best mood. I couldn't wait to get to the studio. And that record, we ended up coming over into this room with Luis, and we spent a few more weeks doing vocals. Incredible experience. That was an interesting way that the mix came out, because he likes his headphones very bright and loud. And I thought I had the headphones sounding really good before he got in. And then when he came in to sing, he said, no, make it brighter. So I just, on my monitor side, I'm brightening everything up. I'm adding a little GML or NTI EQ, making it bright so that what I'm hearing, he's hearing, and it sounded good to him. He's happy. I'm making him rough mixes. Everything's going great. And then it comes time to go mix. We mix over the other building in Studio C. And I took all that high end that I had added off, and I start mixing the record. And he comes in to listen to the first mix and goes, what's this? This is not what I'm used to hearing. It's not bright enough. So I had to chase my tail a little bit and start making it brighter to like it was for his roughs. And the record ended up being a little bit brighter than I would have ever gone, but I listened to it now and I'm like, oh, it's kind of good. I didn't make it annoyingly bright, but it certainly took me in a direction that I wouldn't instinctively have gone into. I was trying to make a warm thing, and it ended up turning into a more, not aggressive, but present, a very present, here I am kind of record. And it ended up at the Latin Grammys, was before the regular Grammys. It not only did it win for Best Mariachi Record, but it won the Album of the Year for the whole Latin Grammys. I was amazed, I wasn't expecting that, because it's a mariachi record up against, I think it was up against J Balvin and Bad Bunny. Like, it was up against
And from what my small knowledge of Latino music is that usually the Mexican records don't do as well.
Yeah.
It's usually kind of Colombia, and they tend to sort of, and other countries sweep it. We work with a Mexican artist who was like, "Oh, Mexican artists never win." Well, it looks like
so. They're
very wrong.
It won those 2 Grammys. So that was Grammy 5 and 6, and then February came around and it won for best ranchero record, or I forget the category. But so that was my 7th Grammy. But they sent it to my house, and it's still in the box. This is like 3 or 4 years ago, because on my mantle I've got 3 Grammys, an Emmy, and 3 Grammys, and I don't know where to put the 7th one.
Oh, what a quality problem! Did you hear him just say that, everybody?
It's giving me.
Change the name and send it to me.
It's giving me.
Just scratch it out with in felt pen. Put a bit of masking tape over it.
I have to get something. I have to get either one more Emmy that I could like put on the sides, or one more Grammy, and then I could balance it.
Well, there you go. That's your solution. But you need to win another Grammy. That's a quality problem. Still in the box.
I'm waiting for the right occasion to open it. I was thinking maybe this interview, but we'll wait to the next one, the follow-up interview.
You could have opened it on camera.
Yeah,
could have opened
the unboxing.
Just a couple more things. Nat King Cole, A Sentimental Christmas. We're getting into the Christmas conversations with Nat King Cole and friends. Cole's classics reimagined using vocals from the original 50s and 60s recordings and adding all new music. Now,
similar to what I just told you about Pam's record.
Yeah.
Just using the vocal with.
But were you able with Isotope, etc., to now really get in there and remove those vocals much better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that there were no problems with the arrangement of it was pretty clean. Like with Isotope, with the music rebalance,
ridiculous what you
ridiculous,
yeah, amazing.
Yeah, that was a fun part. That was a what I call like the COVID project, where I was able to work on my own pretty much, and then Jorge Calandrelli did the arrangements, demoed them up, and then we on that record, it's all synth orchestra except for one violin. Bruce Dukoff played violin.
Incredible.
But the synth orchestra sounds pretty good. But just manipulating it and making it sound like not trying to make it sound like the old records, but trying to give a classy kind of sound to it. It was fun for me when I finally got the transfers to remind myself of that moment when I first heard the unforgettable vocal. And then back in 2020 to like finally get all the, this bunch of 12 songs with, the clean vocal. Yeah.
Nat King Cole's a big thing for me as well.
Yeah.
My father would play Nat King Cole all the time. And when we would go on family trips, we had the 8-track cassette.
Yeah.
And we had Songs in the Key of Life and Nat King Cole. And it was, so a lot of Nat King Cole, a lot of Stevie Wonder.
That's a good trip.
Yep. Let's finish on Christmas. Bocelli and Family, A Family Christmas.
Oh yeah, that's another Stefan Macchio produced record. That was another great experience we did last year with Stefan over in Studio C, just to set up and be able to. We did a lot of stuff over the internet for playbacks and some vocal recordings and monitoring.
Do you use like audio movers?
Yeah, for monitoring and sending. To again work with Stefan in the same room that we did The Weekend Earned It, with Bocelli, who I have a history with, and now his family, his 10-year-old daughter, Virginia, and his son, Matteo.
Are they incredible?
Both incredible, great singers. Yeah, so, that put me in, I did a couple of good Christmas albums with one with Nat King Cole and Bocelli in the past couple of years. That's kind of good.
And then
that explains my Christmas lights. I always carry around because I try to keep in that festive mood.
It's always Christmas when you're working.
Yeah.
So the last note here is Miguel Lugo Moreles.
Yeah, that's a guy that I met many years ago. He's from Laredo, Texas, and he was working over at Westlake. He walked by my room one day, and he says, "I got to meet this guy." So he liked the vibe, and then he found out who he was. And since then, I've done like 3 or 4 records with him. Mostly things that he's recorded with musicians in Mexico. And then he'd come up here for doing vocals and mixing. But for this last record, we decided, or he decided he wanted to use my choice of musicians. So I picked Vinny, Nathan, Landau, Luis Conti, Paul Jackson Jr., Ramon Stagnaro, recorded those guys.
All the new kids.
Yeah. And this is a great record. And Miguel is a great singer. I go over to Laredo a bunch, and he's got his own studio over there, like in a warehouse with a Digico and Pro Tools, and he's got a great place. So he's been fun to work with. A few years back, I can't remember exactly how long ago it was, but I got asked by Barbara's A&R guy, Jay Landers, if I could mix a song that Chris Cornell did for this movie called The Promise. Because they said that they already had, the director of the movie got the mix, and they weren't too happy with it, and Jay thought I could do a good job on it. And I said, okay, sure, I'll try. But it was mixed by Brendan O'Brien and Chris. And they were reluctant they don't know who I am. But somebody insisted, and they said, yeah, just give Dave a try. So they reluctantly said, yeah, you guys can do whatever you want, but we're not going to like it. We already know it. Chris he called me up and he goes, Dave, you can do this, but I'm not going to like it because I've been doing this and I've never had anybody mix without me being there. So knock yourself out. So I did the mix, sent it to him, and then I had to get on a plane to go to New York to do something with Barbara. And the email came back. Chris said, I don't like it. Let's use the original Brendan one. And then I arrive in New York and I get a call from an email from Chris. He said, can you call me when you get a chance? So I called Chris back and he goes, Dave, I think actually now I listened to your mix again because I didn't like it at first because my vocal was too loud, but I ended up, I kind of like your mix. Now, do you have it in stems that you could do a few changes? And I said, actually, yeah, I do. So he ended up loving the mix, and they ended up using it. And,
incredible.
Yeah, I was happy with that one because I was, being a rock and roller, I was a big fan of Soundgarden. And
David, thank you very much.
All right.
It's been incredible.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for watching. Please leave any comments and questions below. Maybe I'll try and throw Dave under the bus and see if he'll answer any of them.
Yeah, and you can find me at davereitzas.com, DaveReitzas.com.
And there will be a link down below to that. Thanks everyone. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios.